Hello, I'm going to be talking about the Tavistock Clinic and The Guardian. And I'm talking about The Guardian. You know, somebody said, why are you reading that rubbish? And I replied, well, I read it so you don't have to. The problem with The Guardian is this. It is read by BBC people and people who like to think they're intellectuals. I don't know why they think it's more intellectual than any other newspaper, but they do. And The Guardian, therefore, is heavily influential, even though it has a very small circulation. I just want to show you how The Guardian has helped push the torture and sterilisation and cruelty to children, which the children that have fallen into the clutches of the Tavistock Clinic will have to live with for the rest of their lives. And some of those lives might end up being a lot shorter because of what's been done to them. It doesn't really bear description, and I'm not going to describe any of it. But imagine you take a young teenager and you then start to subject that teenager to all sorts of medical procedures, which will include sterilisation, removal of organs that they will regret later on in their lives, all sorts of awful things. And these people call themselves doctors and therapists. It beggars belief, really, but there you are, it's right in front of you. And part of the pushers of this was The Guardian, for sure. And they made the situation so toxic for people who raised a doubt about this that they actually shut down people. Now, one thing I've noticed about a lot of intellectuals, or people who like to think of themselves as intellectuals, is that they are great cowards. They live very comfortable lives and they don't want to disturb those comfortable lives. And you get a lot of academics who they're thinking of their pensions and they just keep very quiet and just damp down their feelings until you don't really know whether they actually believe it or not, but they defend it hotly. And I want to show you where this happens. There's an article here by a woman called Suzanne Moore. She used to be a writer for The Guardian, and her article says, "Why I had to leave The Guardian," and then the subheading is, "If you were bullied by 338 colleagues, what would you do?" And then this is what she says. This is just the opening paragraph. "It's March 2020. For several months now, I've been trying to write something, anything about the so-called trans debate in my Guardian column. But if I ever slip a line in about female experience belonging to people with female bodies and the significance of this, it is always subbed out. It is disappeared." I think some of you who've tried to put comments under some of my videos know exactly how she feels. Somehow this very idea is being blocked, not explicitly, but it certainly isn't being published. My editors say things like, "It didn't really add to the argument," or "It's a distraction." Now, this was in March 2020, which means Ms. Moore had been fighting this for several months. And this is the ethos that was saturating The Guardian at the time. So you can say here that The Guardian is staunchly in favour. If you say Tavistock Clinic, as far as The Guardian is concerned, angels with halos are wafting about above it. It is doing marvellous things to rectify mistakes of nature by slicing into the bodies of teenagers. Anyway, in June 2021, pressure was starting to mount because by that time a lot of kids who had been operated on in various ways were starting to speak out. And so here we have an article by Haroon Siddique, and there is disquiet in the ranks. Stonewall is at centre of a toxic debate on trans rights and gender identity. And then he harks back to 1989. There was, it's called Section 28 of the Local Government Act. It forbade teachers from talking about any issues to do with homosexuality with children in the school. And a lot of the teachers were saying, you know, what if a kid comes to me and in confusion and misery, I can't say anything to him, I can't help him. So there was an argument to be made for Section 28 being a very blunt and possibly cruel instrument. But that's another debate. Anyway, Stonewall has been a part of every major struggle for LGBT rights in the UK, but in the past few weeks, it has become embroiled in a toxic row. A founding member has accused it of taking an extremist stance, and if you notice, that's in quotes, which means that Mr. Siddique is protecting himself from being accused of actually saying that himself. A report accused it of giving incorrect advice on equality law, and a cabinet minister was reported to be pushing for all government departments to withdraw from its Diversity Champions programme, which the Equality and Human Rights Commission quit last month. All right, so there are rumblings in the ranks here. Now let's go on to the next one. So that was in June 2021. In December 2021, you got this article from Finn Mackay, and you might call this one of the last of the true defenders. The UK's national hang on, I want to point something out. Mr. Siddique talks about LGBT rights, and he talks about the toxic debate. Mr. Mackay talks about LGBTQ+, and he is firmly on the side of Stonewall. It's just a minor little observation here. The UK's national charity, Stonewall, has recently been accused of advocating for trans rights. Now, it's never been accused of advocating for trans rights. What it has been accused of is pushing people into doing things that they shouldn't really be doing, that they're not ready for doing, or that they embarrassing them in a way into supporting, as I said before, the mutilation of children. There is no such thing as trans rights. I don't understand what they think they mean by that. There are no such thing as trans rights. Trans people should not have more rights than any other sort of person. So this whole thing about trans rights, it's a message that's just shoved into people's brains. It doesn't mean anything. Anyway, let's see. Finn Mackay says, 6 years ago, there was another Stonewall question, but the issue wasn't whether the organisation should be advocating for trans rights, but instead why it wasn't. So you can see this guy is harking back, and he's saying that Stonewall was having an internal argument about how strong it should be for trans rights, which means forcing people to be transitioned in some way. Nothing to do with rights, really. For those of us who remember these fights, it's discombobulating to witness. Now, the fact that he uses this word, discombobulating, which is a flippant made-up word, shows the quality of a Guardian journalist. if you're going to get Suzanne Moore having words being subbed out when she mentions disquiet over transgender philosophy, and those same subbers are not removing that word discombobulating and trying to find something a little more sophisticated, then you know you've got a problem with that newspaper. Okay, for those of us, I'm not going to say it again, for those of us who remember these fights, it's to witness a reframing of Stonewall as a sinister organisation that sneaked trans rights onto its agenda when nobody was looking. The very opposite was the case. Oh no, Stonewall, he's quite right there. Stonewall was never hiding its light under a bushel there. It was always quite clear about what it was pushing for. And what it was pushing for was the torture of children. When Simon Fanshawe, who started Stonewall, he spoke about this in 2021. He got an email from somebody after he'd said that maybe Stonewall were overstepping the mark. He got an email from a friend, an ex-friend of his, which said, by expressing your views, you've put yourself outside Stonewall. And that was must have been around 2019. So you can see that Stonewall weren't exactly being shy about their aims, and also not being shy about depersoning people who disagreed with them. So it says, so he continues, Stonewall public campaigns, training, policy, work with employers and sports organisations, for example, included trans and transgender people. One of the problems, and I didn't even realise this till I started looking into it, was that big companies now, I don't know how much longer for, but big companies were. They didn't do a step without consulting Stonewall. You see, Stonewall was one of those organisations that was set up to do one type of good, and then having achieved that, it then has to find other things to do, or it's got to wind itself up, or at least cut a lot of the stuff. So they had now, there are companies with Stonewall members on the board telling them that their policies should include X or Y, or they should produce some literature in this way or that way, to do with Stonewall. And everybody's dead frightened of them. Anyway, so that was in December 2021. But the little pebble that started breaking off the top of this mountain that Stonewall had created had started to turn into an avalanche, because what had happened was that a lot of the kids who had been tortured, 3, 4, 5 years earlier, were now in their 20s and were speaking out. NHS to close Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic for Children. The NHS is shutting down its Gender Identity Clinic for Children at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust after it was criticised in an independent review. And that was The Guardian in July, the end of last month. So, but you can see this is all very neutral now. So from bullying Suzanne Moore in 2020 and then writing an article about defending trans rights, if you do that, if you attack Stonewall for defending trans rights, you're on a slippery slope to perdition. This article here, just 6 months later, is already very neutral. Now they're standing back They're not shouting about it anymore. They're not calling the people who are stopping this TERFs anymore. And then a month later, in the 31st of July 2022, there is this headline in the Observer. The Observer is, to all intents and purposes, the Guardian. I don't know why there are two papers. I can't tell the difference between them. So, but they're owned by the same people, and they swap journalists with each other. So you can regard this as another Guardian thing. But the Observer has a much smaller circulation than the Guardian. So it's the sort of thing where you put stuff that you're testing the water in. And this is the headline: "Don't buy the Stonewall line on gender identity? Fine, you can't be sacked for that now." So what Sonia Sodha is saying is that, yeah, we should celebrate that you can't be sacked for being a TERF. And this is something good. And she is admitting that her kind were pushing out people who had differing views. She's completely missed that, but she's just admitted it there. She just gave the game away. And now she's saying, oh, well, you know, I'm all in favour of people giving opposite views. You know, I'm such a great person. That's what she's saying. And, of course, by extension, the Guardian newspaper view of the situation has done a 180-degree flip. You might think that the last place to harbour unlawful discrimination would be a barrister's chambers that prides itself on defending human rights and upholding the rule of law. But the Employment Tribunal last week found that Garden Court Chambers discriminated against and victimised its tenant, Alison Bailey, she's a barrister, on account of her gender-critical beliefs. And then it says it's the second such finding of discrimination by the courts in a month after they ruled that Maya Forstater was denied work by the think tank CGD Europe because she articulated her belief in the scientific reality that someone's biological sex is real and immutable. Like Forstater, Bailey disagrees with campaigners such as the charity Stonewall that someone's self-identified gender identity should override their sex, and argues that women have the right to access female-only sports, prisons, refuges and changing rooms. Okay, so this is actually, you can see it's all on the side of the gender-critical people now. So that's what's happened in 2 years. Well, it's more than 2 years, but the first rumblings were in 2020. It took them 2 years to change their minds. Meanwhile, they have caused incalculable damage. It would be funny if it weren't so tragic. And look, they've even forgiven J.K. Rowling. Ah, bless. Well, as I say, incalculable damage. And now they've changed their minds. And that's the Guardian for you. And this is Granniopteryx. I'm to be found on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. I let you know when I've uploaded a video on @Granniopteryx on Twitter, Gab and Parler. And you should subscribe to one of those, because sometimes, especially YouTube, doesn't inform you. Something else YouTube doesn't do, it drops your subscription. So just check out that it's still working. What else? Yes, please like the video, share it, and subscribe if you aren't already subscribed. And please contribute to the channel if you can. It does help me. Okay, well, till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Granniopteryx design or Granbo, with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share, share, share.